for joining our AI and Marginalized Communities session. I'm Cheung, Head of Product at Inequality. I'm very excited to moderate this session. First of all, I'd like to introduce our amazing speaker, Susan Gonzales. Susan is
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Susan. Susan is the founder and CEO of AIandYou, a 501c3 to engage and educate marginalized communities of color about artificial intelligence. Her passion for AI began during her 5 years at Facebook, where she launched and led community engagement for the company. She partnered with AI engineers on accessibility and other social good tools. Susan was responsible for external outreach and inclusion of diverse partners across all populations. Prior to Facebook, she spent over 15 years in diversity external affairs, policy and communications roles for companies including Comcast, tech startups, and Levi Strauss. Her passion is working with marginalized communities of color to create opportunities and support growth. Now I'll hand over the floor to Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Yang. So thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be among you who are changing the world with this unique perspective as a woman. I mean, I applaud you for taking the seat at the table where AI is changing the world. I mean, we need you there. So thank you for joining our conversation today about AI and marginalized communities. We are allowing time for Q&A at the end, so please send your questions in the chat. Today, we will explore how to define marginalized communities and where your colleagues and local communities come into play, and what we can do as members of the AI ecosystem. So what do you think of when you hear the term marginalized? By definition, it is a person, group, or concept treated as insignificant or peripheral. Sound familiar? As women, we qualify. As women in tech, we qualify. And as women of color in tech, we not only qualify, we often even experience being marginalized even more so in our daily work lives. I know, I experienced it, I get it. As women in AI, we have the opportunity to represent other communities, other marginalized communities, the very communities that are often negatively affected by AI. We as women in AI have the opportunity to not only look out for each other, but to speak on behalf of other marginalized communities globally. The opportunity before us now is creating an AI ecosystem that is inclusive. It is critical that we turn the tide to foster inclusive AI. Many perspectives need to be included in the development of AI in order to create a more inclusive AI ecosystem. Part of this work is the opportunity to embrace, empower, and support the new generation of leaders in AI. The other piece is to engage leaders of marginalized communities and to change the public dialogue about AI. It's about perspectives, education, and dialogue. We have the opportunity to bring these different perspectives in AI through collectives such as Women in AI. In just the past several years, your colleagues have created organizations including Black in AI, Latinx in AI, Queer in AI, Veterans in AI, Women in Machine Learning, and of course, Women in AI. Just like you, they are finding support, encouragement, and resources from others that share the same perspective as Black, Latinx, queer, and women. What's fascinating is that these groups have formed only in the past few years. Women Machine Learning has been around for a bit longer, but the others are new to the AI ecosystem. I met these leaders at NeurIPS a couple years ago, where I led the first diversity and inclusion town hall at the conference in Montreal. The conversation was fascinating, and it revealed the struggles we all face in tech, the struggle of finding our voice. After this town hall, I realized there's a chasm between the AI community and marginalized communities. I also recognize that diverse AI leaders, including yourselves, are not getting the deserved recognition at your workplace. Now is a time to make our employers, our organizations, our small companies aware leaders as a means to foster a more inclusive AI process, inclusive of different perspectives. This may require new perspectives from someone who may not be working on your team. So how about if we change the model and include unique perspectives in the development? So let's say, for example, someone is reworking financial services tools to avoid discriminatory results. Wouldn't it be helpful to have a member from Black in AI at the table, or even possibly considering someone externally? For example, in the United States, we have African-American-led organizations for the African-American community, such as the National Urban League. Wouldn't it be helpful to get their perspective? We are at a point now where we have got to stop the cycle of working in AI silos for the good of humanity. Presenting new ideas that impede the speed of progress won't be easy. Some of you may even be shivering at the thought. I get it. I fully understand that the goal in tech is to ship product ASAP. But wouldn't it make more sense to slow down on the front end as opposed to creating harm on the back end and track or create distance from the very tools that were created? We don't have to look too far for this. Let's start with facial recognition. There's a reason Amazon and IBM pulled it back in the wake of civil unrest. Facial recognition is flawed and negatively impacts marginalized communities of color. We know that. Wouldn't it be effective in the long run to include the perspective of AI leaders of color and or community leaders from diverse communities? There are many AI-related stories reflecting the negative impact of AI tools on our marginalized communities. Sadly, this has created a sense of fear and distrust in these communities. Part of this fear is simply not understanding it, its impact, and its potential to foster economic growth. Part of it is people are simply paralyzed by fear of AI and not truly understanding that AI is part of their everyday lives, and more is coming. An inclusive AI ecosystem also needs to include outreach and education at the community level. At AIandYou, we are working to empower our communities with information and to create a more inclusive AI experience. Over time, we hope to improve the trust of AI. I launched AIandYou to foster a more inclusive AI ecosystem. My hope is that more diverse AI leaders are asked to join the table. My hope is that educating and engaging marginalized communities of color will support local economic growth by increasing trust in AI tools. And my hope is that AI for good becomes the new narrative. We're offering free resources at AIandYou for marginalized communities to learn about AI from a non-science lens. Our approach is to educate and engage at the community level. AI is the tsunami that's off the coast, and these communities are not prepared. We need to help everybody understand and to get prepared for the changes that are coming. I'm excited to share at AIandYou, we're launching a new video series, Community Conversations. And we're this month with Eva Longoria and Dr. Brandeis Marshall, a computer scientist. The topic is, why is AI important to marginalized communities of color? It's that simple. These are the conversations we're launching, and we will continue to have in the hopes of improving the trust of AI and in creating a more trustworthy ecosystem. Now is the time to create opportunities such as AIandYou. Today's climate empowers us as women in tech to speak up, ask questions, raise issues, and identify opportunities. What if we all consistently spoke up with questions specifically related to marginalized communities? What if we disrupt the AI development process in the interest of these very communities? So how do we do that as women in AI? Well, we take on the small things that culminate into a big change in the ecosystem. It is doing something as simple as inviting someone with a diverse perspective to join the project team. I know there's a lot of conversation about diversity and inclusion at the employee level, and yes, that is necessary, of course, and that is also a very long road from where we are today. Meanwhile, we desperately need diverse perspectives in the early stages of AI development, and we need to be creative to get there. Again, it may sound scary, but we need to take the risk. I'm not typically the one that walks in protest on issues. I typically support an issue quietly from behind the scenes. But I can't help but think of all the women that have walked before us. So for example, in the United States, we're going to be voting in about 6 weeks. And as women, we are going to be voting because somebody walked before us and some women decided to disrupt the system. I'm sure it was scary for them too. I completely understand in the process while sitting at the table in tech. I remember I would remain silent when I experienced microaggressions. I remember being choked into silence as I sat in meetings. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I was just stunned. I remember never telling anyone how difficult it was to sit through these meetings. But the recent Black Lives Matter movement empowered me to speak my truth in a very constructive, personal way, and it's been quite freeing. It also reminds me why we need to support each other and support this new generation of diverse AI leaders. It is tough being a member of a marginalized community working in tech, particularly when we look around and we don't see anybody that looks like us. And most of the time, when people are called upon to represent an organization, they're typically the more senior people. And today in AI, they typically are not people of color or of marginalized communities. So that's, again, where we can get creative. This is where the network of diverse AI leaders comes into play. Having different perspectives at the table to support us will encourage change. We collectively become an effective network for change. Part of changing the ecosystem is changing the global dialogue today. If you search AI and marginalized communities or AI and people of color, it results in thousands of stories about bias. These stories are based on fact, and we can't dismiss them, of course. However, what if we change the narrative to be more hopeful and inclusive? We need to start telling the story about AI's potential to create abundance and opportunity for everyone. We all know there are so many great things about AI. There is a lot of AI for social good. We don't talk enough about it. We don't talk enough about it in the mainstream media, certainly doesn't talk enough about it. But we can get there. It is time to put AI on the public agenda alongside pandemics, climate change, health, and public education. We can do that. Our social climate is different, and we need to seize it in the interest of marginalized communities around the globe. We all have these communities. They are all defined differently, but they all exist and they live right next to us, if not with us. In the push to advance AI, we need to be constantly vigilant that all of this effort is focused on serving all humans. AI will radically impact the economics and employment for everyone for generations to come. If doctors take an oath to do no harm, should AI engineers do the same? It's kind of food for thought. We have experienced social inequities in this world through the lens of COVID-19. COVID-19 has validated these social inequities in the world today, and COVID-19 is accelerating AI deployment with the risk of furthering these inequities. We have the opportunity to slow the train down. AI development shouldn't be in turbo mode without significant reflection on its overall impact. So for example, I'm certain the team who designed AI automation had no malintent. Of course not. Automation's great. It's effective. It makes life easier for many. But who is most negatively impacted by automation? It's the marginalized communities, those who have the roles now. Families are supported by these roles. Communities thrive through these roles. And these people are being replaced by automation. But we're not talking about it. I'm certain the developer of automation did not consider the significance of job loss, local economic impact, and racial inequality. Automation is a great example. Cities in the United States, for example, struggle to prepare Black and Latinos for future workforce. A study details how different cities are educating and training their populations most impacted by job automation. And despite these efforts, these concerted efforts to train their residents for workforce changes as automation threatens millions of jobs, they are struggling to equip their most vulnerable populations. The African American Mayors Association conducted a study and found through 3 cities to see how they've been preparing students and workers to succeed in the changing labor market. What they found, the initiatives aren't effectively reaching the populations most likely to lose jobs to automation. We must design technology that doesn't inadvertently oppress those who have already been oppressed. We need to look at our part in AI development, ask the questions. This will not be easy as women in AI. I know that. But we must harness today's social climate and claim our voice. Now is the time to include the discussion about the impact on marginalized communities. If you don't ask, as women, scientists, research, and engineers sitting at the table in the early stages of development, who will? We need you. We need your voice. AI may prove to be the most powerful tool that humans have ever built. Building and using inclusive tools are the cornerstones of our humanity. So whether you are a scientist, an engineer, a student, an entrepreneur, you have a role to play in determining what future of AI looks like. And most importantly, you get to choose whether use of this tool will help make life and the lives of those around you better, or will this tool be fulfilling someone else's goal? Now is our time. We can be active players in how AI impacts marginalized communities around the world. Won't it be great when we look back and say, yeah, I was there. I was part of that movement. I was part of creating an inclusive AI ecosystem. And yes, I had the courage to speak up. And yes, I had the courage to ask questions. And it was very uncomfortable. But we did it. We can make a difference at this moment in time. I recently read in every major tech advancement, we have the opportunity in the world. Nothing could better describe this moment. I can't help but think about one of our Supreme Court justices in the United States, Sonia Sotomayor. I got to know Justice Sotomayor when I was in Washington, D.C., and I asked her one time, how do you do it? Like, it's got to be so difficult. And she very matter-of-factly said, you know, Susan, we've got to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's how we all do it. And that has proven to be true. So let's prioritize marginalized communities. Let's consider adding different perspectives, whether they are internal or external. Let's get creative. Let's engage communities, and let's change the negative dialogue about AI. I know we can do it. We have to have the courage to have a voice. And I know it is very difficult, but now is our time. No one, not one organization can dismiss our social climate and the need to be extremely aware of the tools that are being created and the long-term impact. Better to think ahead than to try to reverse what we've done and negate the negative impacts that are happening to all of our marginalized communities in some cases. So with that, I'd love to open it up to some Q&A, and I look forward to having a conversation.
Amazing talk, Susan. Definitely think ahead and be prepared for the future. This is such a fascinating topic. We've got quite a few questions. I'll go in sequence. The first one is from Gabriela. Her question is, in terms of sustainable development goals, have you or your organizations worked with the Sustainable Development Goals global agenda?
Thank you for the question. Thank you so much. Thankfully, we are now working very closely with the World Economic Forum, their AI team. And so we are exploring all different types of topics, and because even the World Economic Forum, as what a history, they have a very rich history. They as an organization have never really addressed directly the issue of marginalized communities, specifically in AI. So more to come on that, definitely. We are in our early stages of conversations, but we'll definitely keep this in mind. Thank you.
I totally agree with you, Susan. So to Gabriela's point, she said we need more work on the gender equality related to AI, which is absolutely more than 200% agree.
Absolutely.
So next one is from Jen. So how can WAI influence the development of AI's culture?
Good question. What's interesting about culture, right, is I think a lot of organizations, by their very nature, want to be inclusive and want to be supportive of women, particularly in AI. Somewhere along the way, it loses its effect in translation. So by the time we get to the table, we're not really experiencing that often. So what we need to do is to speak up. We need to ask the questions. When someone originally presents an idea for a new AI tool or how to improve one that is currently negatively impacting the communities, we are the ones who need to stop and say, have we considered X? Have we considered Y? Have we considered bringing in some external sources to address these issues? And that's where we become an effective system overall as women in AI.
Thank you, Susan. So the next question is from Mary's, from the other aspect. So do you have suggestions for ensuring that companies are doing actual anti-racist work within their company and not just tokenization and optical diversity and inclusion? So they are actually ensuring the company is doing so, is being diverse.
Well, I think what's happening now is there's more of an accountability structure given the social unrest. I lived through the days where in the United States where we had a leader, Rev. Jesse Jackson, was coming to Silicon Valley every week almost. And he was showing up at our board meetings. You know, that's where the diversity numbers started, because this civil rights leader said, wait, nobody's doing this. And that's where it started. Sadly, that momentum lost some steam until recently with Black Lives Matter. And now it's picked up again. And I believe what is happening, particularly in tech, is there's a general sense of a greater accountability because people now are learning about things within their own company. So for example, I mentioned how I was able to share my experiences in a constructive way. It was a little shocking for some people to hear, you know, that I was that senior in the company and that I was experiencing microaggressions and I was choked in silence. And I can't be the only one. And so I think we're on a precipice of change, but it's going to be about accountability, and that's going to need to come from external.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Susan. So internally, you know, it's very hard for companies to hire, you know, a very diverse workforce. So what is this recommendation?
That's why I recommend we need to get creative, right? So for example, how about if we present the idea in the early development stages or in the reworking stages, let's reach out to some community leaders. We all have them around the world to get their perspective early on. I think that's where we do, because if we wait until the numbers are better and there are more women and there are more women of color at the table, it's going to be too late. So that's where I offer, you know, I suggest now is a time to have the courage to offer new ideas and creative ideas. Will they be embraced right out of the gate? Probably not, but that's okay. Bring it up again.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. So the next one is from Camila. What type of AI ethics, governance tools, and methodologies are you using for suggesting for communities of color to have more transparency into AI, which affects us?
We're beginning with a dialogue, because what's happened and what I realized in all the research I've done is that the science community is talking to the science community. So we have a problem with bias. We have this, and then meanwhile, all the affected communities are over here in this bubble, but there's no dialogue between. And that's the beginning. There's really no understanding of the communities that are negatively affected. And so that's the starting point. And is also empowering these communities with information. I talk to people in these communities before, and they say, "Oh no, I don't use AI. That's very scary." Really? Do you use your phone? You know, that's the level of people often don't understand how we use AI in our daily lives. So the beginning, the first step is dialogue, education, and engagement.
Totally. Education, because many people fear of losing jobs, which is a very valid concern. So thank you, Susan. And we are at time. So thanks again to our amazing speaker, Susan Gonzalez. And thank you.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Feel free to reach out, everybody. You can find me at AIandYou.org or on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect.
Definitely. And thank you to everybody for attending our session. Please do visit the Women in AI's booth and register to become a member, and follow Women in AI on social media channels for future events and updates. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.